the diplomatic language was French. There were many words which an English speaker or a German speaker or a Spanish speaker would use that came from the French language. For example, if you're going to make an approach to a government, it is still to this day called a démarche. The British ambassador to the United States made a démarche to the White House about A, B, C, whatever the issue may be. And then on another level, there are sort of bureaucratic phrases which are common to diplomacy.
I was going to ask you about those. I have some in front of me now, the kind of code that diplomats seem to use. Would you translate them for me?
Yes, please.
A frank exchange of views. What does that mean?
Well, usually frank means you've had a row. If you read a communique, for example, and a communique will nearly always characterize the nature of the conversation or the exchange of views. If the word frank comes in, it usually means there's been a punch-up.
If you're talking about what the Foreign Office means by a frank exchange of views, it means a terrible row in which nobody agreed about anything.
Lord Carrington was Britain's Foreign Secretary under Margaret Thatcher.
I remember an occasion with a certain Prime Minister from another country having a most terrible meeting with him in which we disagreed about everything, and it was a very unpleasant occasion. And the Foreign Office afterwards said to me, that was a really splendid exchange of frank and free and fruitful views. It wasn't fruitful. It may have been frank, but it certainly wasn't fruitful.
Let's try one or two more, if I may. How about this one I came across? What I think my colleague is trying to say.
This is very common throughout the whole of the civil service, not just the diplomatic service. This is when you are actually... Well, I can remember circumstances in which someone on my side would say something, and I thought, what a load of cobblers. And as a polite way of correcting him or her, I would then use that phrase.
Well, either the man is trying to be helpful, or else he's being deliberately mischievous. You never know which, do you, until you're there.
In your experience, are diplomats always diplomatic? Have you got into trouble for sometimes being a little too frank?
Yeah, I did, and this is an occupational hazard. I was chairing a meeting in Brussels, and the Italian representative at the meeting said something which I think really irritated me as chairman. And I said in English to him, his English wasn't very good, and so he was listening through the interpreter's headphones. And I said to him, this is not a case of washing the Italian government's dirty linen in public. It's a perfectly understandable phrase in English. God knows how it was translated to him, because he exploded apoplectically and said something about how outrageous it was that his government should be compared to a laundry washing underpants. So you can see how things can go wrong.
Rule number 3. Be charming, but be tough.
You need a hard head, you need a strong stomach, you need a clear vision, you need a warm smile, and you need a cold eye. And all the time you need to have a very clear idea of where your country's national interest lies.
Curiosity, adaptability, a capacity to understand.
Nathalie Loiseau has a rather different list from Sir Christopher, a little more gentle. She runs the National School of Administration in France, a university that provides Paris with many of its top diplomats and trains others from around the world.
And doubt is not an obstacle, is not a weakness. The capacity to doubt is more seen as a strength and a sense of openness.
She served France as a diplomat for 25 years, but just as you begin to think she's probably the softest, most accommodating negotiator in the world, comes this.
Probably cold-bloodedness and certainly courage.
Cold-bloodedness? That
Yes.
Sounds quite menacing.
Well, it's more often than you think that a diplomat is involved in crisis management. And he or she has to stick to values and instructions, but also to react rapidly when other people's security is at stake, for instance.
So a diplomat must be nimble, yet follow political instructions, although not all political leaders leave their diplomats much room for diplomacy.
Lady Thatcher didn't think diplomacy was a very good idea, for example. Well, she felt that it was some way of not putting your own views forcibly enough and thereby sort of kowtowing to your opponents. For example, in the old days when there was a great fuss about the British budgetary contributions to the European Union, she made it abundantly plain where she stood, and there wasn't much diplomatic language or diplomatic attitude in what she said. Well, now, normally speaking, that doesn't work very well, but on this occasion she did. I mean, because she was tough and stood up for what she believed in, she got her own way. There was, of course, in a sense, a price to pay, because the people who were outsmarted by her rather resented it.
Rule number 4. Be honest, but not too honest.
You don't have to say everything you have in mind, but you have to be quite cautious. When you start lying, truth may come back and come back in your face. I think you first have to convince. And in order to convince your partners in negotiation, lie is not always a good option. You have to understand how they react, what is important for them, and what is not important, where are their red lines. You have to pay attention to their personal situation, what they will face when they go back home. You have to make sure that you don't make them lose face. If you want to win 100%, you might not strike a deal, but I'm not certain that lying is the best option, because after all, even if your partner may sound as an enemy for a part of the negotiation, you will have to live with him at the end. So trust and sincerity are better allies in negotiation.
One of the things you should never do is lie. Because if you lie, almost certainly somewhere along the line you're going to get caught out. And when you are caught out, then your credibility and integrity are blown forever.
Rule number 5. Be French.
I was the spokesperson of the French embassy in Washington during the Iraq War, at the time where there was some sort of French bashing in the United States. And to me, it was one of the most exciting moments in my career, because it was I had no question in my mind in the mornings when I was going to the office on why should I go to work. It was obvious. What I had to do was obvious. I was strongly in favor of my own country's position, so it made things extremely easy for me. And it was a fascinating occasion to understand how American media were working, or whether they were dysfunctional. This is something that could be discussed, but it was a fantastic occasion to have this view on the American media.
Did you take offence? I think France was billed as cheese-eating surrender monkeys was one phrase, and the other one, they changed French fries to freedom fries for a while, didn't they?
Oh, I felt so sorry for the American people at the time, but they recovered their common sense afterward.
France prides itself on its diplomatic traditions, and perhaps with good reason. The language of international diplomacy is largely English these days, but Paris produces some grandmasters of the great game.
And there was a time, may not be the case any longer, when it seemed to be that in every European Union meeting we were outsmarted by the French, that the French would achieve their objectives far more quickly than we, the Brits, did. And I remember sitting here thinking, why is this? And actually, it's a variant of what Churchill said. The British style in the old days was that if, say, the Belgians, just choose Belgium as an example, made some proposal to which we, the Brits, objected, we would say to the Belgians, that's a stupid idea. We don't accept it, we reject it, and we absolutely will not vote for it. Please go away and think of something else. And it really upset the Belgians. They'd be sent to hell, and they'd know it. Then the French would come along, and they have a completely different approach. And they'd look at the Belgian representative, and they would say, that is a brilliant proposal filled with imagination and initiative, and we congratulate the Belgian representative on the brilliance of his initiative. We have one or two ideas which you would like to add to it, which would improve it still further. And then the French would put forward a series of amendments to the Belgian proposal which would destroy it. But the Belgians, suffused with pride at having been so lavishly praised by the French, which was a rare occurrence for a Belgian, I hasten to add, would be sent to hell, in effect, diplomatically, by the French without realizing it. And he would walk away very, very chuffed indeed.
5 simple steps to diplomatic success. Follow them and you just might prove Winston Churchill correct. Diplomacy, he said, is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask for directions.